you can potentially concede on things that are lower value to you, but are of higher value to them. Now, intercultural communication is not always a negotiation. It can be sometimes. But a lot of these principles apply, that to get an understanding of people's values is going to be incredibly helpful. So how can you start to do this? How can we get below the surface a little bit? Well, this is where a bit of the research comes in, and I will touch on some of this, and if you're interested, please just take some notes and go and have a look further for yourselves. So there's a whole body of cross-cultural research in this area that really looks at different countries, attempts to identify key dimensions on which national groups differ from one another. One of these is called it's about communication, and it's about high and low context communication. And some of you may have come across this in training, actually. So Edward Hall, who was an American anthropologist and studied different cultures, one of the things that he found was that when people communicated, in some countries, a lot of the message was really implicit. In fact, it was sort of already contained in the context. And the person receiving the message already somehow knew that because they were part of the same culture. So there wasn't that much need to make an explicit information available. And this was the case in countries like Japan, where personal relationships are really important and social networks are very highly developed. Whereas in low context cultures, and low does not mean bad and high does not mean good, cultures like Germany or the US, communication is a lot more explicit. People expect and need more information. So you can see how people will be a little bit frustrated when they don't get the level of information that they're needing from the other person. So moving on to another, and again, a lot of information here. So there are some other frameworks, and these three here are three of the most commonly referred to models of cultural dimensions in the cultural literature. And these are differently derived, actually. They're derived from large sets of survey data about values that have been done with thousands of people across lots of different countries, and then reduced to key dimensions on which countries differ. And these dimensions are kind of polar or dualistic scales, which is something actually that Westerns have a tendency to favor to do with business models. And a culture will be said to lie somewhere on that scale, dependent on which is more important or more relevant. So we'll just take one example. If you look in the Hofstede one in the middle, so the individualism and collectivism dimension. If you've done any psychology, you may well be very familiar with this. But individualistic cultures like the USA, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, ties between people are seen as quite loose. These cultures emphasize independence. You're expected to look after yourself and your immediate family. People are encouraged to speak up. Privacy is very important, and your opinion is important, and often tasks are more important than relationships. Now, for more collectivistic cultures, like many of the South American countries, or Taiwan, South Korea, Japan again, they're much more concerned with the group. There's more of a sort of we consciousness rather than an I consciousness. You're integrated into extended family groups from birth, and you're expected to be loyal to them and protect them. And it's very important to protect group harmony. So relationship is often more important than the task. So this is just to give you an illustration of how some of these dimensions can be used. And if taking that just one of it, for example, in China where I worked, it's very collectivistic. Duty to the family is really important, and how you succeed at work is also important to the family. I mean, it's not unheard of to have someone's mother come into the office to check and ask about their son's promotion. When you're coaching some of the younger Chinese, it's very evident that a lot of their decisions are not made solely by themselves. They're made in the context of their family's expectations. Many people have chosen degrees and professions based on what the parents have told them. And this is not, now we might look at from an individualist perspective, we might see that as being very, not being very independent, but it's not seen that way there. That's the whole point. It's to be loyal and keep your family happy is very important. So, and being able to go home at New Year and tell the family how successful you've been and how you're furthering the family name, and to be able to bring gifts that show this is very important. And so people would actually switch jobs very frequently for a promotion. that would sound better or give more money, and actually this makes retention of talent very difficult. So this is a couple of examples. So the other models are similar. They often, some you'll see as a bit of an overlap. Again, look into them if you're interested. The Globe studies by Robert House were just more based on leadership, so they look at things in a slightly different way. But I say they're all very robust and built on lots of data. So feel free to have a look. But really, these are just a start. So they can be really helpful, and they can help you frame your questions, if you like. But there's also a caveat with these things, and a lot of the authors make this caveat, is that whilst these dimensions are true at a national level and their national preferences, you really can't necessarily guarantee that these will be true at the individual level. Because at the individual level, you have other things operating, like personality, mix of cultures. So third culture kids, like Patrick here, who've got lots of different influences, lived in different countries, they're not necessarily going to conform to back to those national norms. So you really have to make an effort to find out what's actually true. And if you're working these days, it's not about just dealing with one culture. Often, whether it's virtual or real teams, your team will look much more diverse than it had done in the past. So given that you need to interact and cooperate with all these diverse teams, you know, what can you do? What can you practically do to help? So very simply, it's kind of, as we said before, really, is look at yourself first. And again, research shows that those people who fare well and fare better in cross-cultural situations are those that are very open to new experiences. They are motivated to listen, learn, adjust, and curious, and they are self-aware and reflective. So this is where this comes in. We talked before about negotiation, the need to understand your own values first. So the same is true here. And Patrick, I won't go over that much into this because Patrick is going to talk about this in depth in his presentation. So back to frustration then, one little practical thing you can do. So we've said that frustration can be a sign that something is not quite working or there's a mismatch somewhere. So it might be confusion, it might be embarrassment. When you notice this happen, you can take a moment and just have a think about things and sort of practice this self-awareness. And you can just simply ask yourself, okay, what is it that it's annoying me here? And which value is this going against? Why is this important to me? Then ask yourself, what assumptions am I making about this other person? And how do I know that they're right? How do I know that I've not just they are just assumptions? And more importantly, at the end, think, and you can think with the framework of those things that we talked about earlier, those dimensions. Could there be another explanation for how this person is behaving that would help me understand a little bit better? So this is one I just put in because I quite like the picture. But sometimes, you know, you do need to take time to look at it from another person's perspective. So that's a little bit what you can do individually, and say Patrick will go into this in much more detail. How about if you are working in a team and you want to do something with a team? So a few things that I suggest you could have a go at. So first of all, talking about shared values. You can start to explore in your team how you might unite under some shared values and start to look at what the links might be. So again, if you're a coach, you may well have used something like value sort exercises. So there's no reason why you can't do that as both individuals or collectively, and start to find out where there might be some matches and explore that. There's a sort of an exercise, and again, this would be perfect out here in Dubai. It's kind of called talking to the campfire. You can take people out to an evening fair. You get everybody around a campfire, and you just have them tell their stories. And because storytelling is just such an old tradition, but it really gives you a perspective of where they come from, what's important to them. And people often find if they're talking to something else rather than face to face, they'll often be a little bit more open. That's another thing you can do. Moving on from that, the Strengths Finder. If you, again, as coaches, you probably use this, but this is actually available in lots and lots of different languages. So there's an opportunity here to potentially do this with a team. You can. What's great about this is not only is it that it's very focused on the positive and is looking for using the potential of all the team, it also creates a shared language which you can then use to talk about things together, and helps to bring all the members of the team in. And then there are other sort of almost change processes that are becoming more and more popular these days in organisations. So the World Cafe is an example, and you literally can get almost the whole organisation together, depending on the size, in a sort of cafe-style environment, small tables, small groups. Each group, you mix up people so that you get people to talk to each other who wouldn't normally even come across each other probably within the company. And you use questions and you use listening, very much a coaching attitude. But the important thing here is to start sharing information and sharing ideas. And then the idea is that collectively you start to gather a whole lot of synergistic information that you can then use as a team to create together, which is a really nice exercise. And then another exercise, similar sort of vein really, but very much based in positive psychology again, and on a strength approach. Again, if you're interested, you can have a look at this in a little bit more detail, or consultants will often can facilitate this sort of thing for you. You use this framework of appreciative inquiry, and it's very much based on let's start with what's working rather than framing everything as a problem. Let's look at what the possibilities are, and it brings people in. What can you do more of? What strengths can we leverage? And importantly, what do we value about each of the team? What is the contribution of the team, and how are you united? So it's really just starting to change that perspective from a perspective of differences to a perspective of synergy and collective potential. So my final little bit here then is, and I've whizzed through this actually, so hopefully it's not been too top line. How can coaching help? Well, hopefully having listened to some of this, as a coach you will definitely see the connection. Underlying values of culture, getting to them, coaching is excellent at doing that. It's excellent way to start understanding your own perspectives and to take another perspective. And it's because it creates this non-judgmental, safe space. So really, say Patrick is going to go on to talk much more about the coaching and how that can help. And I hopefully that some of this has been helpful so far. And with that, I will pass the baton on to Patrick. So there you go, Patrick, and you can hopefully I'll work out how to stop sharing my slide. And
okay. So let me go full screen. All right. Oops. So I hope everyone is doing great. So I'd like to start my part of the presentation with a personal story that happened to me not so long time ago, actually last Christmas. So imagine I'm sitting on a Sunday about to have a family lunch. There's this nice smell of food in the air. The table is set, and we are ready to get at the table. My parents, who are French, my wife, who is American, and our two children, Benjamin and Rose. And as lunch is served, my son starts to eat with his fork and knife. And the dialogue goes something like this. So my mother, Benjamin, so my son, you're not holding your knife and fork properly. Let me show you. My wife, actually Marina is my mother. The way Benjamin is holding his knife and fork is fine. That's the way we do it in the States. My mother, well, actually, that's not how we do it in France. This is not the proper way. He should be holding his knife and fork like this. So you see on the photo very clearly that there are two ways to hold your fork. And you can guess that the conversation was not going in the right way. My wife was not happy about the situation. And you can imagine the rest of the dialogue over just a difference on holding the fork and knife. And what was supposed to be a pleasant lunch turned into a heated debate. And I really felt like it was a wasted opportunity to spend a good family moment together. So the point of the story, first of all, is not to judge one another. It's not to say that one is right and one is wrong. The point is that this type of situation can happen to any of us. Because like Suzanne mentioned, sometimes our assumptions, our values, our beliefs are unconscious. And without realizing it, we may be judging some other people or the way they behave. Or we could be on the other side. We could be the one feeling criticized for our ways. And so the cost of cross-cultural misunderstandings can be great. First of all, it can destroy relationships. When you look at companies, you may lose clients because you don't understand their cultural background. You can also, at the level of a leadership team, you can be underperforming because people inside the team don't understand how to work together. And that creates a lack of engagement and motivation. As an HR professional, you may face high turnover because, again, there's a lot of people inside the company who are not happy and leaving the company. And if you look at things on a broader scale, on a geopolitical level, it can be the source of wars between countries. So these cross-cultural differences, we all know, have dramatic impact on our societies. And so they need to be dealt appropriately. So the question we are facing as leaders, as coaches, as consultants, as HR professionals, and as individuals evolving in the global world are the following. What can we do to deal with cross-cultural differences more efficiently? And the topic of tonight being, what can we learn from coaching? So these are the questions that Suzanne began to answer and that we will further explore in the following slides. So the first point I'd like to make is that reality is a matter of perspective. Here you have two people from two different cultural backgrounds. You can see different parameters. The one in orange are the one related by culture. So Suzanne already mentioned some of them, which are beliefs, values, assumptions. Others, more general, like expectations, mindsets, language, experience, self-image, and more importantly, the way you look at the world. And so, because I'm French, for instance, I may be exposed to a certain way of thinking. My values, even though I don't know about it, may be influenced by Christianity. My attitude towards women may be different than in other parts of the world, etc., etc. The point here is that we have filters through which we look at reality, which creates a certain perspective. However, it's not the reality, it's just an opinion. It's just a perspective. And those filters are modeled upon our cultural background through our parents, our school, our political system, our religion, etc. So what's the real challenge here? As mentioned by Suzanne, the challenge is that most of the way that our cultural influence is mostly unconscious. We're not aware of it. So what can we do to become more aware of our own cultural biases? So I'd like to share with you a little story. I was coaching a French director of a big multinational here in Dubai, and his boss was the GM of the entity, was coming from India. And to give you a bit more context, his boss was very non-direct, very implicit communication, non-confrontational, wanting social peace. And on the other spectrum, my coachee, so the French person, wanted to put things on the table because there were things that were not working right according to him. And he wanted to discuss openly during leadership meetings, even if it meant conflict. And so we can see here some kind of cultural influences that may have been at play here. Indian culture is more about communication with a high context, meaning like implicit, indirect, like Suzanne mentioned in the different framework. It's also about more collectivism, like preserving the social peace, with opposition by French, which is more about low context, being more explicit and favoring individualism. So cultural preferences give us clues about what may be at play on the cultural level, but we have to be careful to check if these clues apply or not to individual. Otherwise, we may be taking the risk to stereotype people and put them in boxes. So what I'm saying, in other words, is not because most French people, for instance, smoke, that I'm a smoker. And like here, the challenge is, as a coach, is to see what part may be coming from cultural and what other part may be coming from the personality traits of the person, it's herself or himself. So I'd like just to put this forward, and it's just a disclaimer for all other stories I'm going to share. My intention is not to stereotype people, but just to use some general overview of cultural tendencies. So in order to help my coachees see things differently, well, the first thing that's important is, before trying to understand the other points of the other people's point of view, is to first realize your own bias. So to become aware of your own way of looking at the situation. So with that particular coachee, I use a technique called perceptual positioning, which invites you, or more precisely, which invites the coachee to look at the situation from 3 different angles. So the first one that you see on the left, so the left person in blue in the first position is the coachee, and the one on the right is his boss. The first question that you're going to ask, the boss is not there, it's just a representation. So you ask the coachee in face-to-face, if you're looking at the situation through your own eyes, what do you believe to be true? What do you see? How are you feeling? These are the type of questions you're going to ask him, and you're going to express his own way to perceive the situation. Then you're going to ask him, well, now let's change perspective. Let's imagine that you project yourself into your boss's shoes, and that you look at the situation through his own eyes. And you ask him the same question: what do you see? What do you believe to be true? How do you feel? And that gives him, that forces the person to actually change perspective. And the first step is to ask the person, the coachee, to take the position of a fly on a wall and look at those 2 people in his imagination again, looking at two people talking and asking him, being a fly on the wall, what do you see? What do you observe? How do you feel? What can you notice? And through this process, the coach was able to better understand partly how his boss may feel and where he was coming from, and also bringing into using all the insights that he got from all the 3 positions, he was able to put in perspective his own thinking. And so he went from a position to where I'm right, he is wrong, to a more rich situation to where he had to investigate, and he had different opportunities and different options to take forward. But more importantly, it helped him become aware of his own assumptions, which was hidden to him before. So I think that's a great tool that anyone can use, coaches or maybe managers in a face-to-face, to explore a situation and help the person shift perspective. The second aspect of things is, and it goes with the drawing. So the man asks, who wants change? Everybody wants change. And then he asks, who wants to change? And then no one raises their hand. And the challenge here is that it's kind of funny, because I work with many directors here, working with a boss from different culture. And very often what I've noticed is that they didn't understand where the boss was coming from. They were questioning his decisions. They were complaining about his behavior, or things that were not going right according to them. And they couldn't relate to the boss. They didn't understand what was going on. And obviously they would have done differently had they been in the shoes of the boss. The problem with that complaining attitude is that they cannot do anything about it. They cannot change the situations because they don't control how the boss thinks, how the boss acts, and the decisions he makes. So it's very counterproductive. And so I like to use a framework which is called at effect and at cause, to help people basically in excuse mode to step back into a more productive state. So to present to you in a few words, the model, it's basically, are you an effect, or are you at the origin? Are you at the power state of the situation? So being an effect means you're being passive, you're just complaining, you're finding excuses, you are victimizing yourself. And because you are victimizing yourself, you're powerless, and you cannot change the situation. Whereas if you change and switch to being a cause, you take full responsibility to what's going on, you embrace the situation, and that allows you to take action and to try to change the situation. And using this framework with my clients, that's basically what happened. He was able to realize that he was the one, even though there was a problem in the relationship, by his non-action, he was maintaining the problem. He was not doing anything to change it. And that was a big aha moment for him. And that's something that we can see in many cases, is that people think that they're expecting the other person to change and to solve the problem instead of taking action. So the second learning, I would say, is to take the first step and not wait for the other person to change. So the third dimension, the first way to move forward and create stronger cross-cultural relationships is to seek to understand the other person's point of view, the other person's perspective. So far what we have done is we have explored how we can uncover some of our own biases, or help people uncover their own biases so they don't control them, so they're not ignorant of what's going on. The second step is to make the first step in taking action, in changing the situation and showing leadership, rather than wait for things to change. And now here, what we're talking about, it's about shifting your perspective to discover the other person's point of view. So like you can see on this slide, the person in green completely put on the side all his agenda needs and all his cultural beliefs. He forgot about it, put it on hold. And he comes next to the blue person and try to understand how this person is seeing the situation. And to do that, so obviously you have to forget what you know, what you have to put aside your hidden agenda. You have to put aside your story. And that's where Suzanne already touched about this point, but it's about being curious about how the other person is seeing the world. And it goes by actively listening to what the person is saying, by asking open-ended questions about how that person is perceiving the situation, by basically seeking to understand what is going on in her head. And so all this, what I'm saying, in other words, it revolves around adopting some coaching skills, coaching mindset. And that can be quite challenging at times, because it requires that you step out of your comfort zone. And it feels very uncomfortable at times. So it's very challenging. So to share another story with you, I was coaching a Lebanese manager here in Dubai, who was very much into telling people what to do, very directive, which could indicate that he had a cultural preference for high distance power environment, where he enjoys situations where power is not equally distributed, that he enjoys having more power than his subordinates. And this way of doing was perceived quite aggressively by some of his collaborators, and actually it turned out that this behavior was in conflict with his own goals, because he wanted to gain respect from his team. So by being seen as aggressive, that was counterproductive. So he really worked around it, and as shown in the picture, he really tried to move next to his collaborators instead of confronting them. And one thing he did is he started to, instead of speaking first, he let the other person speak first, and started to be curious about his opinion, asking him questions, and investigate what was his point of view. And in the end, this helped create a better connection between him and his teammates. And so that's another example of how coaching can help build a stronger cross-cultural relationships. Because what I forgot to mention is that his teammates were from different backgrounds, different cultures. And to go a step further into seeking to understand the other person's perspective, there's something that's more subtle, which is to pay attention to the small signals. So small signals could be body language, like how does the body look like? Is it crossed arms in maybe a resistance position, or is it open? Paying attention also to the energy of the conversation. Do you feel tense in a conversation? Do you feel relaxed? Do you feel comfortable? Or on the contrary, is it boring you? Could be also another aspect of the attitude of the person in front of you. Is the person, do you feel the person engaged, or is she thinking of something else if she's not really present? And also the language. Is she using expressions that indicate that she's resisting, even though she's nodding? Like she could say yes, but all the time. So you have to pay attention to the small signals. Why? Especially in a cross-cultural context. Why? Because all the small signals are a source of misunderstandings, and you want to clarify them to make sure that there's nothing unsaid and something that's not clear. And this is called to meta-communicate. For instance, if you have someone crossing their arms in front of you, you said, I noticed that when you said that, you crossed your arms. What do you think what happened? What went through your mind? And that's where you're able to clarify something that was unclear. Another example, I was giving a managerial training at Nokia, which is originally a company from Finland. And when I was preparing the workshop, somebody who was used to working with Nokia told me that I had to tell you something. You know that Finnish people are very comfortable with silence. If you don't know it, you may be surprised. They take a lot of time to think. So this was interesting information, because had I not known this, and seeing someone very silent for a long time, I may have wondered what was going on. And actually, if I wanted to meta-communicate on that, I would have said, "Well, you are being very silent. What's going on through your mind?" And that's an easy way to just clarify what was going on and avoid any misunderstanding. And obviously, to be at this deeper level of listening, you have to be fully present. You're fully focused on what the other person is saying. And you have to listen beyond what is said, not just beyond the words. So to wrap up our presentation, we could summarize all that we've seen tonight on the 3 categories. There's a part that deals with who we are, or who the person in front of you is, and it's about self-knowledge, understanding who you are, your values, which are hidden, your beliefs also under the water, your perspective, your point of view. And a coach can help you discover who you are exactly, or as a manager, as a leader, you can ask questions to help the person understand what may be his values and beliefs. The other part also, it's an invitation to shift to a new mindset, to become curious, to become an active listener, to step out of judgment, and to be at cause instead of finding excuses, and to experiment new behaviors, new ways of doing, new ways of thinking. This results in the what. It can help solve conflict. It can help you manage your frustrations in cross-cultural relationships. It also can create a safer environment, and even more importantly, to create a motivating and engaging working environment. And also the how. So we have seen tonight several tools. So Suzanne talked about appreciative inquiry, with the World Cafe, the Strength Finder. We both mentioned active listening, the framework being at cause, being an effect, meta-communication. So these are just a small sample of tools that coaching can bring to the table of cross-cultural challenges, and how it can help bridge the gap between the different cultures. And to conclude, I'm going to pass back the mic to Suzanne. Are you there?
I am there. Sorry, I'd muted myself to make sure my dogs weren't barking in the background or something. Yeah, so I guess the point here was to say that if we approach this with the right perspective and we take time to consider both our own values and those of others, then cross-cultural challenges don't need to be challenges. They can be opportunities for growth and opportunities for connection.
Great.
Sorry, yes. You weren't expecting me to stop there, were you?
Let me try to so that's it. That concludes our presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. And we are very curious to hear about your questions. If you can ask, either we can give you maybe the hand, or you can just ask questions through the chat box, whatever you prefer. Any questions? Well, I think.
Patrick and Suzanne, this is Ute from ICF again. I think that was a very good webinar on creating awareness on everybody's sides, whether it's coachee or coach or even our normal environment. So thank you very much. Are there any questions from the audience to the presenters? No? Well, I have to admit, Patrick and Suzanne, I think it was actually very clear what you explained, and maybe that is the reason why nobody is entering the question.
We'll take that as a compliment. Thank you.
yes, no, it's absolutely a compliment. I cannot see any hands raised neither from the audience, so I assume everybody has taken your feedback on board. If you have any questions in the future, and or you find a question that you think of later, you can always reach out to our presenters directly. I think you've shared your email addresses, haven't you, Patrick and Suzanne?
Yes, yeah. And also, just to add to it, I mean, if not only if you have any questions, but I would be really interested in your experiences, and whether any of your experiences here, especially if you're working in quite mixed, diverse teams, whether they echo what we've said or whether they differ, and particularly if you know as well people that are really good at doing this, good at handling that, I'd be really interested in any of those examples. So if you have a minute and you want to get in touch, I would really appreciate that.
Okay, let's leave it like this. Any future questions, please direct them directly to Suzanne and Patrick, or you direct them directly to ICF and we can get you in touch. So thank you very much for this very interesting webinar in International Coaching Week. This was organized by ICF Dubai. Thank you, Patrick and Suzanne.
Thank you, Ute. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.